So, let me tell you about Robert Emerson. He's an ordained minister and a writer and a columnist, and he wrote a book, Tab in Retrospect. He's lived in Tab most of your life. And Tab in Retrospect, if you're interested in this book, I'm going to pass around a sheet of paper, and you can sign up, put your email down, and he will email you a copy of Tab in Retrospect. So he can tell you more about it because he's got a lot of information from it that you're going to hear. But if you would like a copy, he will give it to you. Yes? So I have a copy. So I'm going to give a few quotes about history from this book called Tab in Retrospect. It says the word retrospect indicates that the history of Tab is being told from the viewpoint of what this community is today and how past events have brought us to the present condition. And isn't that the point of history? How do we get to where we are? We are standing on what came before us. And that's one of the reasons those of us who study history think it's so important. And Santayana's famous statement, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it, was made in the context of the larger thesis that knowledge of the past should determine the direction of the ever-changing course of future events. History helps us avoid repeating past mistakes, and it also clarifies the destiny to which we should be moving. Quotes from Mr. Robert Emerson. Your turn.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to do one of my favorite things, talk. The subject is halfway house during the Civil War. But before we get to the Civil War, let's give just a little bit of background to the halfway house. It was halfway between Hampton and Yorktown. It was located where today would be the intersection of Yorktown Road and Big Bethel Road, right across Big Bethel Road from Tabb High School. In fact, it was an ordinary, that was a place sort of a combination of a restaurant, a bed and breakfast, and that sort of thing. You could stop there, get a meal to eat while you were traveling, or you could spend the night if necessary. Right at that point where Tabb High School is now, the halfway house was across the road from it. But where Tabb High School is now was stables and a turning point in the road, so that if the person was traveling from Hampton to Yorktown, if that wasn't their plans, if they wanted to just go halfway, they could turn the thing around. They could also, if it was the time of day that needed to, they could unhook their horses from the stage, and they could be fed and kept overnight to proceed to Yorktown the following day. In fact, there were some of the old deeds in York County refer to what we call today Big Bethel Road and Yorktown Road, refer to it as the stage road. There are other places that refer to it as the main county road. I remember it's almost like a little bypass. If I get this thing. What did I do wrong here?
Everybody want computers? This computer wants to update some software right in the middle of our presentation.
Of course, naturally.
Please be patient with us. It's going to do that every so often.
Okay, this is a map. It's called the Fry Jefferson map. It was published in 1751. It was drawn by Joshua Fry and Peter Jefferson, who was Thomas Jefferson's father. It was commissioned by the government to draw this map. This is just a little cutout of that map. I want to call your attention to two things about this. This road, there's one road going from Hampton to Yorktown. There were other by roads, but this map would indicate that that was the major road. This road goes through what we call today Tabb area. Also, the other thing I want you to notice is also the only landmark in the central portion of the peninsula, of the lower part of the peninsula, is the halfway house. It was a prominent place, very prominent place. It was also a prominent. This is a Revolutionary War map. You notice also, once again, that road that was called Yorktown Road If you were in Hampton, you called it Yorktown Road. If you were in Yorktown, you called it Hampton Road. Once again, Halfway House is the only landmark mentioned on this whole map, prominent place. This map has something that is roughly equivalent to Route 17, which goes into Newport News, which at that time was not a town at all, just a little. Newport News had been a geographical location from the very earliest time, but it didn't become even a village until 1890s. Okay. This is not a picture of the halfway house. I've shown it several times and people go away thinking that it's the halfway house. This is not the halfway house, but it is the home of the man who owned the halfway house during the Civil War, William Russell. We have this picture today by the courtesy of Nancy Hobson Alvarado. Nancy was William Russell's great-great-granddaughter, and she is here with us today. Nancy, stand up so everybody can thank you for making this thing available. This house is an exception to the rule for York County, for the lower part of York County. When we think of the Civil War, the plantation, we think of the huge mansions, the big columns and the big elaborate homes, but this was exception to the rule in York County. This was probably the biggest house in York County at the time, in the Tab area of York County, maybe for the whole county for that matter. The man that William Russell inherited from his father, Thomas Russell, who owned over 3,000 acres of land spread out over 3 counties. He also owned 50 slaves. This somewhat is background for the social situation during the Civil War. This is a little chart that I made about slavery in York County. Best way to get what I'm trying to get at here is to look at the column on the extreme right, where the percentage. Notice that from 1890, 1800, 1810, there were more slaves in York County than there were free people. We sometimes think about slavery as being something that goes on in the deep silence. We want to think of maybe as characters from Gone with the Wind or something like that. This was in York County. Also notice on this one that York County always had, through the entire, that this thing covers, always had more slaves than Virginia at large had. There's good reasons for that. I'm going to talk about that another time. Oh, I did the wrong button. This is a slave document that I have. It was given to me by my nephew, who was a descendant from the Tabb family and therefore from the Smith family. It is very difficult to read. If you want to read it carefully, see my book that I tried to transcribe it and print it on typewriter. This, if you see right in the middle, a slave named Fanny. It's not a slave, it's not the sale of a slave, but rather the renting of a slave for 1 year. She was rented for $30. This reminds me, oh, by the way, the people down at the bottom, George Greenwood and John Manson, according to the census records, lived in the Tabb area. In fact, the Greenwood man lived next door to the Smith, Bernie Smith, who was Alexander Tabb's guardian. So this reminds me, we're not talking about characters from Gone with the Wind, but things that happened right here in York County. This is getting to the Civil War now. Notice the same map has that one road over the whole peninsula, the main county road. Also notice that at Big Bethel, what if I get this thing? This is where the Battle of Big Bethel took place. Halfway house right up above it. Now, if you were going to try to stop an army that was traveling up this road, the most likely place to stop them would be at Bethel Church. You notice that the river, that's back river that comes in there, eventually it goes on, when it gets small enough, they call it Kill Creek. But if you were going to stop this, the army along this road, that would be the place to do it. The Civil War in Tabb is divided into two distinct times. From the beginning of the war until April 4th, 1862, it was under the control of the Confederacy, and after that, to the end of the war, it was under the control of the Yankees. Now, up until April in 1862, the whole area that is north of Bethel Church was controlled by the South. The Yankees, by the way, Fort Monroe was one of the few federal military institutions that never fell to the South, even though it was located in the South. And it was the overall strategy for the Civil War was to conquer Richmond, the capital of the Confederacy, and that would sort of, the Confederacy would fall apart eventually. That did work, but somewhat that way anyway. But, so, they built up the forces at Fort Monroe with the idea that they would go to Yorktown and they would have to go along this road. Between Bethel Church and Hampton was sort of like a no man's land. It was a sort of contested area, and raids were going on there by both people. It said that this was a logical place for the, if you want to stop an army, would be there at Bethel Church. This is a cutout of the Dick's Nap, the area. All right, that's the Bethel Church right there. This area right in here today is the Bethel Reservoir. But at the time of the Civil War, the people called it a marsh, a morass, several things. It was just a place almost impossible for the horses and all to go through. So if you were going to stop this army that was going toward Yorktown, if you could stop them from crossing that bridge, you were halfway there. In fact, there was one man that was stationed in Tabb in the Confederacy cavalry, and he said that when he tried to drive his horse through this area, the horse sank in blood all the way up to his feet. When he was, so it was, okay. General Magruder's strategy for defending the peninsula was to build places along this road, this prominent road there. There was Little Bethel was actually in the no man's land. That was never built up to be a very big military post, but it was more like an outpost. It was something to warn them that the other people were coming. Big Bethel was that biggest place where they grew up. There was a post at Halfway House, Howard's Bridge, Coppertown, that's a word for Grafton. And so all along, his strategy up until beginning of 1862 was to defend this road, because he assumed that if anybody was going to go from Fort Monroe to Yorktown, it would have to go along this road. This another cutout of that same Dick's Nap. You see Bethel Church down at the bottom, and the Halfway House. This before you get to the Halfway House, you see Rosedale. That's right there. That's the house that I showed a picture of that Nancy provided for us. But you can see how close. There was an army base there. In fact, there were army bases there in 3 different wars: the Revolutionary War, War of 1812, and the Civil War. But you can see that if the battle at Big Bethel was down here, the close proximity from the Halfway House to there would make it very important in the Battle of Big Bethel, which it proved to be. This is a man that was a part of the Confederacy. Robert Harrison wrote this thing, and he said the next place of importance we arrived at on our route was a Halfway House. We were within 2 miles of our destination, procuring supplies of fodder for the cavalry and the artillery, each man taking up as many bundles as he could. Okay, so we were saying here that the Halfway House was sort of like a support base for the battle. They were on their way to Bethel Church, where the Big Bethel was fought. I wish that thing would stop doing that. I'm going to try to do it myself this time. Y'all proud of me? I wrote the next. I'll skip some pages in this book. I wrote by the halfway house. On reaching this place, an unexpected spectacle met our eye. As far as the eye could see, the road was filled with mass of men glittering with muskets, proceeding in trained artillery. This proved to be the third company of the howitzers. They had arrived late in Yorktown. These were the halfway house. Then was a point here for the build-up of the Confederate forces for the Battle of Big Bethel. And all you people from Corson, you might be interested to know that this man, at this point, and I'm skipping here, he told about being sent into Corson to investigate because they'd gotten messages that the Yankees had made a landing somewhere in Corson, and a group of them went there, and you people from Corson, you realize that this man was very complimentary of the terrain and how pleasant the place was. And they went all the way to the end of Hunt's Deck, and they found that there were no Yankees there, so they came back. That really did not do very deal. The third paragraph there, Colonel Magruder ordered movement to the halfway house. We halted there but a few minutes when alarming orders were communicated to the different commanders to make their men fall in as quickly as possible. One man, this is what I put this on there, one man who was sitting on the rail of the porch of the tavern, instead of falling in, let the butt of his musket fall down on the bench, but bang went the load through the ceiling above. A line of battle was formed in the backfield of the house. I mentioned this because, as far as I know, no picture exists of the halfway house. The closest thing that I've ever seen of a picture of it was on a map that had a little diagram. But we know from this that the halfway house did have a porch on it that was covered and a rail around it. Now, the bottom paragraph, 150 yards below the tavern or the halfway house was on the opposite side of the road, of the Hampton Road, stood a large, handsome white mansion. That's a picture, that's the house that I showed you a picture of a little bit earlier. Notice this. This was Colonel Magruder's headquarters. In the field above this house, we spent the night and portion of the next day, which was Saturday. That was just a couple of days before the battle, Big Battle. This is, he at this time was Major George Randolph. He was Thomas Jefferson's grandson. He was commander of the howitzer company. And actually, I'm not always authority on the Civil War, I'm authority on anything for that matter. But the Battle of Big Bethel basically was a contest between cannons. And this was the first time that he had occasion to use his position as commander of the howitzer forces. And actually, I think he should be considered one of the heroes of the Battle of Big Bethel. This is David Hill, and he got to the site of the Battle of Big Bethel several days before the battle took place and built fortifications. He was a person who placed the cannons in strategic places that allowed the Southern Army, which was outnumbered at least 3-1, but by placing the cannons in certain strategic positions, we were able to stop the Yankees' advancement. This is Magruder. Notice how flamboyant he is dressed. He was went in for this real fancy dressing, and from that he gained. Some people called him Prince John. There were other people that called him the Duke of York because his office, his headquarters was here at Yorktown. But he was a very cagey man, I thought. Some people criticized him, but he knew how to pick the best place, as he did here at Big Bethel, to stop the enemy. When he was always outnumbered, he would also maneuver his soldiers, which few that he had. He was always outnumbered. He would maneuver them to make the enemy think that he had more than what he did. Couldn't be any more different than this man, who was Edmund Butler, who was a commander of the Union forces at Fort Monroe. He was very cautious, and like I said, the two people, Butler and Magruder, were the commanding officers of the opposing forces. Magruder somewhat became a local hero. One we called him the hero. Robert Hudgens, who was lived in what is today Langleyfield, and fought with the Confederacy at the Battle of Big Bethel, later wrote a book, and he told about 3 months after the battle was over with, he was here in Yorktown, and there was a party or dance going on at Nelson House, and he made the statement that when Magruder made his entrance at this party, he said all the young ladies' hearts fluttered at the appearance of the hero of Big Bethel. He took risks. He's rightly also called. Okay, we get to the Battle of Big Bethel. We don't have a great deal of time on this. Notice, like I said earlier, that this is where Colonel Hill had positioned the places for the cannons. These three cannons, the three cannons on the north side of the stream would stop they were in range to stop anybody from crossing the bridge. The one on this side, which I think was a very risky thing for him to even put a cannon across there, because they didn't have the advantage of being separated by this morass and swamp or whatever it was. But this cannon that was on the Hampton side of the stream misfired, and when it misfired, the Yankees did cross the stream and went up to Bethel Church as far as the graveyard, but they couldn't be supported because it was the terrain wouldn't allow that. After that, the Yankees tried to go this road down toward your right. You see that one over there? That's where Colonel Winthrop was killed. And in making his report, Major Randolph said that a cannon was brought from the halfway house to replace this cannon that had misfired. And once they did that, then this cannon was within range of the Yankee forces. They killed, when they started firing like that, the Yankees finally gave up and retreated to Hampton. It was overwhelming, and by all the numbers, it was overwhelming victory for the South. This is a picture from Harper's Weekly. Harper's Weekly had an artist that they paid to travel with the Army and make pictures along the way. You notice that Bethel Church is over to your left over there, and you can see that predominantly it is a cannon fire. Pictures of that. This is Winthrop. He was the man that tried to cross the stream on the right side and was shot and killed. Some people said that he was the first officer of the Union Army that was killed in the Battle of the Civil War. Some people contested because they said he wasn't really an officer, it was just a wealthy person that got a plane with him. This is Wyatt. When the cannon misfired, and it was three men tried to go into the enemy's line and destroy the house that they were somewhat hiding in, and he was killed. He is considered to be the first person killed, first Confederate soldier killed in the Civil War in a land battle. What's his name again? Wyatt. My book has it. I don't know his first name. I'm sorry. There is when you go across today, you go across like you went into Hampton on Big Bethel Road, where the Bethel Reservoir is in there. There's a little park in there. They have monuments with his name and all that stuff on it. This is Lieutenant Rebel. He was the one that was killed when they fixed the cannon, when they got the good cannon back from the halfway house and fired. Wasn't much firing after that, but this, he was the Union officer who was, had cannons shooting the other way, but when he was knocked out, then the Union forces just gave up. Nice looking man, died. In my opinion, for no good reason, as well as the others. This is a picture from Harper's Weekly that depicted when Rebel was being killed. A man named Robert Sneed was in the Union forces. He was an artist and a map maker, and he drew pictures, painted pictures, apparently with watercolors, it seems to me, through the whole thing. And in fact, the books of his pictures have been published and very interesting. Oh yeah, got that thing again. Okay. Of course, you can read, "Here lies the graves of our enemy, that no vandal disturb them again." All of the people writing about both the North and the South went out of the way to prove that the bodies of people killed at Big Bethel were treated with respect and were buried as honorably as possible. Okay, let's have a little bit of alternate history. What would have happened if the Yankees had won Battle of Big Bethel? You know, a lot of people think that the battle was really insignificant. In fact, one of the preachers at Bethel Church, writing history of Bethel Baptist Church, called it a little insignificant skirmish. Frank Taylor Carmine, who is now teacher in high school, a government teacher, said one time it wasn't even really a battle, it was just a little skirmish. I think it's more important than all that. This man, E.C. Gordon, was a member of the Confederate forces, and much later on he became a minister. A good while after, I think like 40 years after the fact, he wrote a history of the Battle of Big Bethel. Now listen to what he says here. Had the federal commander been possessed of accurate information in regards to the Confederate position and the roads of the country, he could have, without firing a gun, have compelled Magruder to retire to Yorktown. A force of federal troops could have struck the road to Yorktown 3 miles above Bethel Church via Lee's store and the Broken Bridge Road without passing near 2 miles of the thing. What this map up above there is a 1907 map I do because it shows some roads that no longer exist, namely that road right there. What Gordon is saying is that they could have gone here to Buzzard's Roost. Buzzard's Roost was a store, I remember when it was called that, and I remember when Saunders Road today, what we call Saunders Road today was called Buzzard's Roost Road. Shirley is nodding her head, she remembers that too. They called it Buzzard's Roost because in the country stores sold alcoholic beverages, all the old buzzards would come there and dip their drinks and then set into the pots. And became the Buzzard's Roost. But what Gordon was suggesting was, had the Yankees taken half of their forces, gone down, this is what's on the road today, it goes up to Harpersville, and I can remember when Harpersville was right 17, and this would go around, and that Broken Bridge was right here. They could have, he said, just go from that on to Yorktown, which had been left almost defenseless because Magruder had moved all of his forces, not all of them, but a great deal of his forces to the site of Big Bethel. So I was trying to see on this map, it shows it a little bit better. see the road that he was talking about going down. And then there's, shows this other road that no longer exists. I didn't ever know that such a road exists as that when they were reading this stuff. And then I found some maps that showed that road right in there. That's a road running parallel with the reservoir, would be the reservoir today. But he was suggesting that could, well, he said this going to Yorktown, he could have come from behind and attacked the Confederate forces on both sides. I would go a step further and suggest if the Yankees had not sent all of their forces, see, the Yankees had, some of their forces were at Fort Monroe. The others, there was another group, a fort, it's called Fort Butler. Fort today is the C&O Docks. And what happened was that the two groups, the Yankees from both of those places were supposed to rendezvous at Little Bethel Church, which is the Liberty Baptist today, were supposed to rendezvous there, and then as a united force proceed to Big Bethel. But what happened was that they got their communication mixed up, and the two Yankee groups shot at one another. And they also left, destroyed any possibility of a surprise there. But I don't think that was much of a possibility anyway, because they knew it, because they'd been preparing for it a pretty long while. But this is that area at the Broken Bridge that they talked about where they would come to. This map shows present. Magruder wasn't any dummy. I mean, he sent those people into Corson to protect, which would have been his right flank, and he anticipated the possibility that the Yankees could have gone through this other road, or maybe even do what Gordon was suggesting, and he sent a group to a place called Broken Bridge. Broken Bridge. When I was a teenager, I lived home where I was raised, was right at the top of this map.
Isn't that right at Newport News, York County line, right there on Route 17? Is that Broken Bridge?
Yeah, that's Broken Bridge. When I was a teenager, we lived right there, right across the road from that, and there was the farm right across from us had a sign that said Broken Bridge Farm.
Yeah.
The whole area was called Broken Bridge. I didn't know it, but until I saw all this stuff. The Broken Bridge has been fixed. That's the way Broken Bridge looks today.
Yeah.
It was strange. That's the stream that supposedly would stop on this. This is where it looks today, Joel, just as you're going into Newport News. I would imagine 1,000 people go over this every day without having the slightest idea that they even crossed the bridge, leave alone that during the Civil War there was a post there.
That was a heck of a lot of construction there when they built that thing, because we were going back and forth from Newport News to York County building my parents' house when I was about 6 years old. And I mean, that was a mud hole for months while they built that bridge there.
This is a official's order from General Magruder, and I listened. He was establishing the chain of command right after the Battle of Big Bethel. This was like November, and I listed up here because he lists the different forts that were in this area. And notice up the top, the troops in the vicinity of Bethel included Broken Bridge and Halfway House. So we got the three right there. Then when you come down to the bottom of that, he lists the other camps, and all of these were basically on that same road except Broken Bridge. That was over not what we call Yorktown Road today. Yorktown, Upper Grafton, Church, Ships Point, Harrodsville, Cape Marion, Halfway House, Broken Bridge, and Bethel. This is, I think it's Captain Port. He was from Gloucester, and he was stationed at Gloucester Point. And after the Battle of Big Bethel, Magruder wanted to reinforce the area, And this man, well, let's read what he says. Entering the army in April 1861, we carried the first cannon to Gloucester Point and there camped for nearly a year doing picket duty at several places while there. Later part of 1861, we were transferred over to Yorktown, Virginia, across the York River by means of schooners, only staying there a short time before being transferred to what was known as a halfway house between Yorktown and Hampton, near Bethel Church, the first battle of the war. While stationed at this point, we destroyed a number of boats from Back River to prevent Negroes from escaping and going to the Yankees. We also destroyed a grist mill to prevent its use by Yankees. And during the engagement of Monterey Merrimack, we were ordered to attack the land, driving the Yankees from the town, which now, as report used, defeated them. Well, he didn't do that last part. There's three things that he mentions here that I think somewhat describes the military life in the Taft area during the Civil War. Destroying sinking the boats to keep the Negroes from, as he called the Negroes, from escaping and going to the Yankees. This was a problem. It was a prominent problem that the slaves were getting free, or claiming their freedom anyway, and moving to Fort Monroe. 3 slaves from the Phoebus area escaped and went to Fort Monroe, and Butler took them in. He was the commander there, took them in. But that presented Butler with a problem. The owner of the slaves sent an envoy to him asking him to return the slaves to him based on the fugitive slave law. Butler's first inclination was Virginia had seceded from the Union so that the slave law did not, a fugitive slave law would not apply. But if he said that, we were fighting this war to prove that secession was not legitimate. And if he said that, if he made this claim that because then he would give credence to the act of secession, so he couldn't do that. He finally came to the conclusion, called these slaves counterband because they were being used by the enemy to build forts and so forth. And based upon that, he allowed the slaves to stay there, and there was actually thousands of slaves in the little town that was developed right around there. Abraham Lincoln, I don't know whether he knew about, I'm sure he knew about this, but I don't know how much he was dependent on what Butler did to write the Emancipation Proclamation, but he used the same principle, that because Lincoln was fighting to preserve the Constitution. The Constitution allowed slavery, so he couldn't proclaim, the Emancipation Proclamation could not be proclaimed on that basis. It would be contrary to it. So he did the same thing as Butler did. He claimed that they were counterband, and that's why that the slaves, the Emancipation Proclamation only applied to the countries, the states that were in rebellion. If they weren't in rebellion, then he could use that principle. Did you know that the Emancipation Proclamation specifically mentions York County to be exempt? And that was because by this time that he made this proclamation, by the time he made that, this whole area was being controlled by the Union forces. There we go again. This train needs to be gone. The other thing that the man mentioned was, it said that they destroyed a grist mill. It's one of the reasons why the Civil War is so interesting to some people, is because it was the first time that the concept of total war was applied. Total war had been applied always in history, but not to the extent that it did during the Civil War. That is, that you no longer just took two armies and put them on a field and see which one would kill each other most, you know. The concept of total war is that you would destroy the enemy's ability to wage war. Now, the thing that Paul said in that little thing that we read a few minutes ago, that they destroyed a grist mill so that the Yankees wouldn't use it. They were almost assuming that the Yankees would take over the Tabb area, so they destroyed that. But the extreme part of that was the burning of Hampton. Magruder ordered the burning of Hampton as a part of the concept of the man who was the commanding officer of York Rangers, which most of the people came from the Tabb area of the York Rangers. Sinclair is said that he burnt his own home, and the next man, William Storrs, later became the commanding officer, also was in on that. This is one of the advantages to Merrimack. This is that J.J. Marks was a chaplain in the Union forces, and after the war was all over, he wrote a book about it. He's the difficulty and danger of disembarking troops at Fortress Monroe and subsequently taking Dog River as base of that operation was simply caused by the terror of the Merrimack had existed. So the Merrimack was blocking and enabling activity traveling up the James River. And the existence of the Merrimack actually caused the Yankees to march through the Tabb area. This is Lieutenant Corson. He was in the cavalry, and he wrote a book. He didn't write the book. He wrote letters to his girlfriend. His girlfriend was named Jenny, and his grandson wrote a book, published his letters in a book called My Dear Jenny. He was stationed for a while at what he called Camp Bartlett. That was where King's Gallery is today. Some of you who've been around here a long time would know it was John King's farm. There was a place there. He was stationed there, and he was there as long as it was under Southern control. And he gives a description of what life was like in Tabb area as long as the Confederates had control. We have a delightful place here right on the bluff that overlooks the Corson River. There's an abundance of good water, convenient, and boys amuse themselves at leisure hours, bathing and fishing. That don't sound like the Civil War, does it? The people here are very kind. The soldiers do everything in their power to administer to our comfort. Our boys feast on fine fish and watermelons until it's difficult to find sale for them. Going talking about how you could buy anything here that they could in Richmond. This was that, I said that the Civil War in Tabb was tied into two distinct areas. This is what it was like when it was under Confederate control. Okay, Magruder had to change his strategy. It's no longer was his strategy to defend Yorktown Road, defend the road that ran parallel with the peninsula. There he developed three lines of defense that would go perpendicular across the peninsula. That man that talked about he had such a nice place and the boys amusing themselves, fishing and bathing and so forth, he was moved to Young's Mill. And when he was at Young's Mill, he wrote Jenny a letter in which he said, if it's all possible, to find somebody to send me some food, because we go days sometimes without anything to eat. It was no longer that good anymore. Magruder actually conceded all of the Tabb area to the Yankees. He had no choice, really. I mean, he had about 14,000 people, and the Yankees had built up to like 120,000. So it's no and this first line of defense, which is Youngsville, Howells Bridge, that would be around where Kentucky Farm is today, and Chips Point, they were more like something to hold them off long enough for the people to retreat to the main line of defense right there where the big battle of the peninsula later occurred. A lot of the York Rangers deserted right after this decision was made, because they took the position, we joined the army to defend our family and our homes, and he said we can do this better by staying here than going in the army. And at this point, after they did move off the peninsula, then the York Rangers became Company I of the 32nd Infantry Division, and they were caught up not in defending their home, but all the larger ramifications of what the Civil War was all about.
Robert, is that Howard Bridge where Harwoodville Reservoir is now, at 17 crosses there?
Right, exactly. Not where 17 crosses, more like where on Oriana Road, you know, the bridge in there.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know, you remember when they drained the reservoir about
Yep.
10, 15 years ago? And when they drained that reservoir, you could see the fortress, you know, the thing, what do you call it?
Bridge.
No, where they had mounds of dirt, you know, like up in Yorktown. Yeah, right, that's what word I was looking for. This is the line that's been moving back for another time, moved along. Okay, this is another picture from Harper's Weekly. This is the Yankees moving through uncontested. They're crossing Big Bethel. The church there is Bethel Baptist Church. Notice that, how big that church looks in that picture. And also, it looked like some kind of a retention walls around it to keep it up out of the mud. The Yankees just moved through here uncontested, not until they get on up to where Newport News City Park is today. David, I can't think of it. Here we go again. Okay, this is Bethel Church. You notice how big that church looked in that previous picture? Before the Battle of Big Bethel, the church had a membership of 306 members. And after the Battle of Big Bethel, their minister joined the Confederate Army, and when he came back after it was over with, the first service that they had when he came back had 33 people to attend. One of the biggest losers of the Battle of Big Bethel was Bethel Baptist Church. I put this here because notice the monument there. That wasn't put there until 1905. But that monument, if you ride down Big Bethel Road, you can still see that monument. So that gives you a sort of a landmark to know what you're talking about in this thing.
This is a later building, obviously, the building.
This building, the thing up there says it was built in 1876. The last services were held in 1926, and it stayed there until that's right by where Taylor Farm is today, but now it's moved across the road, a much bigger church. This is Miss Tavy. She is a woman for whom Tab got his name. Her name was Mary Octavia Smith, and she married Alexander Tab. She became postmistress, and that's where the name Tab came from. That didn't happen until 1893. But she wrote a diary when she was a teenager, and if you the book, My Dear Jenny, that man talked about, you could get some idea of what life was like in Taft area during the first part of the Civil War, and when they moved on, then Miss Tavis' diary sort of described it. Here's how the life had changed. No longer was it our boys amusing themselves at leisure. J.J. Marks, that chaplain in the Army, said, the suffering of these poor, defenseless, and unprotected families were a character to awaken the deepest pity. The land was swept of fences, grain, horses, cattle, everything they had during the summer. They were destitute. And this Tavis diary, there's an entry there that she talks about that they were going to rule, they were going to guide the people by Yankee rule. And Dix, that man that commissioned that map that I referred to, the Dix map, he became the commanding officer at Fort Monroe. And this is what he said that the Yankee rule was, to leave the people unmolested if they continued in the quiet pursuit of their customary occupation and give them aid and comfort to the enemy. That would have been very nice if they really did that. And generally so it was. When you read Miss Tavis' diary, and then some other people, Benjamin West wrote a book called When the Yankees Came, and he lived in what is now downtown Newport News, and his family where West Avenue got its name from, right next to C&O Docks where he was. And the conditions were so bad there that that family actually moved out and went and lived in Lynchburg throughout the war. So there was a difference there between the way that they described that. You say, I think this thing updated and moved out. Here we go. John French White, I was about to flip pictures here. He was born in the Tad, in Corson area, but he moved to the Seafoot area. All the white people, Dickie White, I'm sure is some kid to you. He was, give him a book and read it. He wrote, but 40 years after the war was over with, dictated to his son. It's a handwritten, his reminiscence of the war. And he tells about the places that he went. Marble Hill, Battle of Sharpsburg, Second Battle of Fredericksburg, Brooks Church, and Cold Harbor. And in my book, I tried to follow what the people that were in the army from Tad did during the Civil War after they'd gotten tied up in this larger fight. We do have to mention it. Captain Stokes. I remember people talking about him like he was next thing to God. He was the commander of the York Rangers, which eventually became the Company I. He was loved by his people, and he was captured at Five Forks, and he knew that if an officer was captured, he would not go to the same prison as the enlisted men. And he wanted to stay with his men, so he pulled off his jacket and got the jacket off of a sergeant who had died and put it on and told the people and gave him the wrong name, said he was William K. Stores. That really messed me up. I was doing research on this and I found references to William K. Stores. I said, could it be two people with that name that close? But this is what he did this so that he could stay with his men rather than being put in probably a better prison camp. I'm real proud of this little fact I found. He eventually moved to York County, married the older sister of Tabby, the woman who wrote the diary, and his daughter, the woman that he married, inherited the old Smith property, the Smith home place, which is today would be Edgewood subdivision. He eventually became the first superintendent of schools in York County.
Wow.
I called up the school board to try to find out who was the first superintendent. They couldn't tell me, but I found it in some. This is the release records of Alexander Tabb. I mentioned him because he was the one for whom Alexander Tabb was too young. He was only about 15 when the war broke out. But after a couple of years, he sneaked through the enemy line and went and joined the forces. He was taken to Fort Lookout, and he eventually died of tuberculosis, which was probably contracted during John Preston. I put that up there because he was an interesting person. I just want to mention him. Interesting for a couple of things. You remember where I said that the people were sent to Broken Bridge, they were sent to Preston's farm. That was Carl Preston, and this man was Carl Preston's son. And interesting because he took a slave with him. He had a slave named Charlie Smith that traveled with him throughout the whole time that he was in the army. That happened, I don't know how often, but it wasn't anything unusual for that to happen. He accredited Charlie Smith with saving his life because when Lee's army was just about gone, Charlie Smith went out and stole a sweet potato, and they could eat the sweet potato for their lunch, and he's claimed that was his life. He was taken to Fort Lookout, Maryland, and Charlie Smith went there to bring him home after the war was over. another interesting thing, after he came back and the war was all over with, he bought that store that was called Butler's Roost. And he was very successful as a merchant, and he bought a lot of surrounding lands all around that store. I thought that was interesting that there was a Confederate soldier that bought the land where the Yankees were, where that position was. I think this is John Frederick White. He became a minister after the war was over with. He was somewhat like a lay minister. He performed weddings and funerals, and sometimes he conducted worship services. And his son became an official minister, and his son became pastor of the church that was located on the battlefield of Marble Hill, where he said that was the first battle that they were in. And 44 years to the day after that battle, his son invited him to come there to preach. And so he went there to this, wasn't really a battle, more like a slaughter. He went back to the place where this battle had taken place, and as he said, near the memorable battleground, to preach a message of peace and goodwill to men. I thought it was, maybe that was symbolic of the whole reconciliation process for our country. But here was a man that was involved in this horrific battle, goes back to the same site and preaches a gospel of peace to all men.
Robert, one of the stained glass windows in our church is dedicated to him.
Yeah,
The second.
Okay, yeah. I think that's a good place for us to stop, and I've already run over 3 minutes. But I do, if you want, I mean, I'm going to stay if somebody has some questions. If anybody needs to leave, feel free.
Anybody has questions, please speak up so we would like to get the question on recording as well.
I just want to make sure that everybody sort of has a general idea where the halfway house was located. Sort of, I know most people should know Tab High, if you can sort of direct that.
And I should have had that picture of what it looks like today. I did it, but one time before, when I've done this thing on the halfway house, not much the Civil War, but it's kind of push for time. But it's right. It's sort of like a Y in the road when you're going down Yorktown Road. Originally, Yorktown Road just went straight and was what is Big Bethel Road today, and another road went off into Pocosin. But now, Yorktown Road goes on down into Pocosin, and Big Bethel Road comes to meet it. I remember when Big Bethel Road was called Saunders Road. But anyway, they come down to meet it. It's sort of like in a Y in the road. That's where the halfway house was.
And Big Bethel Church, the Bethel Church, with the cemetery there right in front of it, is next to Cape Heart housing there on that, and then the reservoir came up, and that's why they took down the church, right?
Yeah, right. Like I said, when you have that monument, if you go down the road, there's a big anchor fence around it, and if you go down that road, you can still see that monument there, and that gives you sort of some. I think that this picture, I cropped it a little bit, but it seemed to me that monument is closer to the road now than it was then, so probably the road was built, has been shifted a little bit closer to what the church was.
I understand that Big Bethel church that you had in White was put on rollers and moved down where it said Taylor's Farmhouse behind another church.
I don't think that's correct. I think that church that was behind it, what it used to be when I was a teenager, was on the opposite side of the road from where Bethel Church. You're talking about the old Bethel Church, the one that's white.
The white one.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That building was across the road, and I remember when it was used for Sunday school classes. Sometimes I'm sure that I went to Sunday school in that building for a while, a little while anyway. But I think that was something different from. It could be that was what was brought down, but I don't think so. Well, could be. Did you have something?
Well, I was thinking, I was with Dave one time when we were at Taylor's Farm at that church. Is that's not the same one?
You're talking about Charles Parish, I think, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's Charles Parish.
Charles Parish Church is well, the foundation to Charles Parish Church is right down beside the old Bethel Church. Where you were talking about the white Bethel Church, not the brick one. Right. Charles Parish was this church. This was a non-denominational church. It was given by the Taylors. Had given some land to it. As far as I can remember, way back there, we used to have some Halloween parties and things like that there.
So that white church is not the Bethel church?
The white church is Bethel Church, but that thing behind it wasn't.
Okay.
I remember when that was moved, probably in 1953. It used to be on the opposite side of the road, right in towards the edge of the woods now. They moved it across there and used it for the youth department. You may be right, but it may have been, but I don't think so. Like I said, I'm not the
Across on the south side of the picture, I think in the area we were talking about, there's a small grave site in the back part of that property. Do you know if that's in some way related to, it looks like there's maybe 10 or 15 headstones in there.
You mean when you cross Victor
If you're
Boulevard?
if you're coming from Bethel, right where Bethel and Victor cross, on the south side of that quadrant there's a small grave site. In fact, it's up against the fence line of the house.
That's a Thomas family grave site. In fact,
Thomas family?
Yeah. In fact, I had a couple of funerals there.
Okay.
It was a Thomas family.
Okay. So the present location is of the halfway house was directly across from Taft, directly across from the fire station. That's there. Is that right?
The fire station, yeah, it would be, the fire, Julius Hobson, Nancy's father, told me that when they dug the foundation for building the fire station, they ran into the brick foundation of that Rosedale, that nice looking home right there. And that was, and you know, somebody said, you know, when I read through with that, they were at the halfway house, and I think they said a couple hundred yards there was this extension.
Okay, so it's maybe been a little bit further north from that location.
Yeah, the roads tend to move, you know, and like I've seen pictures of stores, like Julius Hobson's store that was there. I remember when they had gas pumps out there with cars parked could go on either side of it. And now the road had just moved in, like when they resurface it, then they move it over an inch, two, and over years it just moves like that. I don't know, just there was a lot of land related to the halfway house. I went through all the deeds for the halfway house, and sometimes along with the halfway house, that was as much as 160 acres. At one time, it was sold with only 5 acres, only 10 acres. The halfway house goes way back. 1705 is the first reference to it, but that was referencing a will that was left from a man named Day to Edward Taft, and that man died in 1688, but it's not real. You can't be concrete in making this statement because possibly he inherited the land without the building being there. The building could have been later. But his widow did run the ordinary that halfway house. So the halfway house goes way back. If you consider 250 years ago, maybe a long way back.
Well, we're talking about two places. The halfway house is in the vicinity of where Tab High School, the fire department, and all that is. But then this lady was talking about over on Saunders Road where the monument is. Didn't you have two things going?
That's where
That's
the
the old-
Bethel battle stuff.
Oh, okay. All
That
right.
was Bethel
I'm
Church.
with you now.
That Bethel Church was moved. Well, when Langerfield was built in 1916, 1917, they created the reservoir, and that made it. They flooded all the area around the church, and that's why they no longer could operate the church there. And
So the church was moved, it's not underwater.
I don't know.
I've heard accounts that says that the original church is underwater, under the reservoir.
Yes.
That's where the original church was, we believe it was underwater.
Well,
They took it down and moved it.
there was,
They did move it?
The original one first.
the original one, that one that looked kind of big, you know, in that map, in that picture of the Harper's Weekly, that was destroyed, became unusable during the Civil War. Now, they had what they call a brush arbor, and Miss Elizabeth Smith wrote History of Bethel Baptist Church, and she said that the brush arbor was built for the congregation of Negan during that time, and that brush arbor was built right in where the reservoir is today. I'm not real sure if this picture that I had with the monument there, which said 1876, something like that. I think there was probably another building between that, because in Miss Elizabeth's History of Town, she says that the weatherboarding on the church was vertical rather than horizontal, and that the first building that was built, so that church could have, you know, it seems to me that must have been, or either they remodeled it, you know, tore off that, and she said that there was something from construction, some building in Hampton that they used the material to build that first church that was built. But it doesn't seem like to me there would be that much time, you know, from time to 17 or 18.
One more question? Anybody have one more question?
So what happened to the halfway house? Why is it not there today?
The halfway house, I found a deed. I traced the halfway house from back at the courthouse, from back to 1705. There's a concrete one that makes reference to a will of 1688. And it was very active, but see, as I remember, when I was a teenager, that Big Bethel Road was sort of like a out-of-way place. You know, there wasn't much traffic on it or anything like that. But after the C&O docks came in and more roads built other places, Hampton Highway was built, you know, it became a byproduct. One of the deeds says about the halfway house, in describing it, they said the property, including the residence of the halfway house. So I took that to mean that the halfway house at that time was no longer an ordinary restaurant, whatever you want to call it, but rather somebody was living in it. It was sold to the Thomas family in 1912, and I remember we always called Miss Thomas, Miss Kate Thomas, operated the store there, and I remember everybody just still called it the halfway house.
Did you mention that it was there in the Revolutionary War as well? That it was
What's the man's name was the big trader? Benedict Arnold, yeah. He was harassing people all around, and they went up, some of the records say that he went up York River and disembarked and came to the halfway house, but I think they got mixed up. I think it was really the Coast River. Anyway, there's a lot of evidence showing that the halfway house was a post during the Revolutionary War. That's in my book.
I researched that thoroughly.
Yeah.
It was a very active post.
Yeah, it was a good place where I found most of the information was people applying for pensions, and when they applied for the pensions, they had to prove that they were in the army and where they were doing, and there were a lot of them that said that they were discharged from the halfway house.
In 1781, in March, there were 3 companies stationed there, one from Albemarle County and 2 from Emerson.
And the French was there for a while. A French unit, I can't pronounce that French name, Saint-Moir or something like that. It seemed to me, and I guess it was maybe because of the forces, the thing that I was using was having to do with people applying for pensions, but it seems to me that a lot of people were sent there to be discharged. I got that impression anyway. Also, it was during the War of 1812. There was a battle there, and one man, a man named Tennis, said that he died at the halfway house. The problem with that was the date that they gave for his death at the halfway house, his will dated 4 days later.
Did it burn, or was it torn down, or what?
The Thomas man that bought it in 1912, his grandson, Phil Thomas, told me that his mother, his grandmother, said that some of the brick walls were still standing. He said brick walls, so I don't even know if it was brick. And she said that it was way beyond repair, and they just demolished it and built their home there.
Termites eat it up or something?
Well, it was just, one of the men, Lemuel Russell, had inherited it. I think he bought it from his brother, and he lived there for a while, and they said that he moved across the street because the building had become in such disrepair. But when they called the halfway house the residence, that's what told me that it was no longer
A functional house.
The halfway house was a center of community activity for this whole section of the county for a while. Sometime when I talk just about the halfway house, not the Civil War, we'll go into that.
Thank you very much, Robert.